Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. With just a handful of days left in the month and a celebration coming at the end of the week, you know I'm excited to share what lies ahead in the sports world and in the podcast. So thanks for stopping by to consume it all, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And as we approach these final few days, and with a coronation to start off the month of March there on Saturday, with a big time celebration, the 7th anniversary of the podcast coming your way. I'll have a live stream, all the details, not only toward the end of this podcast, but also for the week ahead, because I'm going to be plugging this left and right here as we get that much closer to celebrating number 7 here for yours truly, and obviously the JAYREELZ podcast. But before we get to all that, I'm going to start off with the hockey. I want to start here because I've been starting off with the basketball here over the last couple of weeks, especially since Super Bowl 59 has set the sun has set on the horizon. So for the NHL, which had a very big week, and as we all know about the Four Nations face-off, and I get it, it's already 3 days old. It's old news at this point, but I'm going to start with this particular premise because it's going to lead into here the quote-unquote second half of this NHL season, as well as the trade deadline, which is a week from this coming Thursday. Is there going to be any juice, any carryover from what had transpired in Boston there on Thursday night to where we get some buildup, we get some excitement as we steamroll? Maybe that's a little bit too strong of a word, but as we head into March and then a big month there, and then of course once we get into the month of April, that's when things will really start to take into shape as we get ready for the postseason. If you ask me, the game there on Thursday night, which was an excellent game, and it boiled down to the overtime where Jordan Binnington was the savior, you could say, because he made 2 big stops in the overtime, one on Austin Matthews and another on Brady Tkachuk, which had a tough angle, but certainly had close to a wide open net with Jordan Binnington with a glove save there to preserve a 2-2 tie. And then Connor McDavid, which a lot of people are wondering why he was left alone there in the slot to shoot it right past Connor Hellebuck into the net for a 3-2 win. And although we didn't get the pomp and circumstance in Montreal 5 days prior to that, where we had the booing of the national anthem by the Canadian faithful up in Montreal to the 3 fights in 9 seconds, and I mentioned this on Thursday's podcast, I didn't think we were going to see any fireworks. In fact, maybe you would have saw some fisticuffs there in the first minute or so. Obviously, that was not the case, and in fact, the Americans started to boo the Canadian national anthem there in the opening, but as the anthem went on, for whatever the reason, maybe they posted up on the Jumbotron to please respect the Canadian national anthem, so therefore they subsided, and it was actually pretty quiet until you got to the U.S. national anthem. And even though the buildup heading into that final on the heels of what took place there just 5 nights earlier certainly did not have any of the fireworks, any of the fisticuffs to be a spirited start to that final game, but it was a battle, and it was hotly contested, and of course with McDavid scoring that overtime goal as Canada prevails yet again over the U.S. If you want to date back to the Olympics there in 2010, as I've talked about. And then now we're going to have this 1 year on, 1 year off, whether it's All-Star game next year, and then as a matter of fact, you're going to have the Olympics next year. Then the following year, you're going to have this type of scenario, whether it's going to be a Four Nations face-off or maybe even a World Cup from what I've heard. So you may have more than the 4 teams. You may have as many as 8 teams, or even more than that. 8 may be just the baseline, but you could have more when this is all going to develop here over the next couple of years. So you're not going to see an all-star format for quite some time. But I think this World Cup / Four Nations face-off was certainly a hit. Their ratings were through the roof. Think about it. They garnered 9.3 million people to watch the final for a pretty much an exhibition. This isn't an all-star game. Obviously, it's not the postseason. And for them to do that on the heels of what we saw there in the NBA, as far as it being a disaster with the All-Star Saturday as well as the game there last Sunday, and it just blew it out of the water. And you would think that the suits there on Fifth Avenue or somewhere in Manhattan where Gary Bettman was smiling ear to ear, and I'm sure is looking at this as an event for years to come, whether it's going to take a pause next year, obviously, like I mentioned, with the Olympics that are taking place in Milan. And for the NHL, they came out smelling like roses. That's all there is to it. But now, is this going to translate? Is this going to transfer onto the regular season? And like I said, with the trade deadline in a week and a half, you're going to probably see a lot of wheeling and dealing with teams that are looking to try to get into or get into position for the postseason, or for those who have really done well this year to solidify their roster, whether it's bringing on an extra defensive player, defenseman, or defensive forward, a scorer. Who knows? Right now, I can't even read the tea leaves as to who could be on the block. You'd have to look at some of those lower level teams that are looking to maybe unload a contract or maybe get something back in return, knowing that a team is looking to get some reinforcements there. I get it. We still have 10 days to kind of surmise and go over what could possibly transpire. And I'll probably get into that maybe a little bit more on Thursday and certainly next week for sure. But I would think this NHL season, it's going to go back to being its old regular self. Although there is a big-time milestone that is right now lurking and inching closer, maybe a lot more than we could ever expect. And that's on the heels of what happened there yesterday afternoon in the nation's capital with the one Alexander Ovechkin. And I guess I'll segue there because you've only had the 2 games here over the weekend, or the 2 days, with a bunch of games. Nothing really that jumps off the page. I know Edmonton's going on a long East Coast trip, and that's also another one that they're going to have to endure in the middle of next month, as they haven't come to New York just yet, but they're going to face the Devils, Rangers, and Islanders over the course of a 3-4 day period. But and I'll get to Edmonton in a second, but for the Capitals and Ovechkin, and I talked about them last week, being a big surprise this year, and a lot of attention and a lot of expectations are going to be held there down in DC for them to make one final cup run, we would think, especially with the Ovechkin record and the grade 8 and what he's trying to pursue here. And yesterday he registered a hat trick, another empty netter on top of that, but they do count when it's all said and done. But for him to get goals 880, 881, and 882, he is now 13 goals away from snapping the all-time goal-scoring record of a career held by who else? The great one, Wayne Gretzky. And for him to do this at this point of his career, 39 years of age, and we've talked about this over the course of the last couple of months. And yes, I did mention about the attention. Is it going to get any attention, especially once he gets down to 10 and into single digits? That we'll have to wait and see. If you ask me, with the hockey world, yes, and the hockey media, but as far as the sports landscape and as far as just maybe even the good sports fan, I don't know if it's going to resonate as much. It's not as if it's an American-born player or even a pretty known famous Canadian player. It's not as if Sidney Crosby's trying to get this, or who knows if anywhere down the road, Connor McDavid. This is a Russian player. Not that that should hold that against Alex Ovechkin, but still, they probably couldn't or wouldn't even pick out Ovechkin in a lineup, even if you're a good sports fan. But for him to now get closer, he's a baker's dozen away from breaking this record. My thing is, in 25 games, will he be able to get the 13 goals? And with the pace that he's on, why not? Unless he goes into a big-time drought here, and it could happen. I'm sure teams are going to gear up, or who knows? Will teams kind of let it play out to where, not that they're going to let him score, but let's just say if a team facing the Capitals, whether they're up 5-2 or down 6-2, and it's middle or late third period, will they give Ovechkin the slot, or will they give him an opportunity to score those goals just so the fans could have something that they could remember for the rest of their lives, that they saw Alexander Ovechkin score a goal on his pursuit to break this, what was an unthinkable record? Who knows? You never know. It's almost like having a player go for a home run record, and if the game is out of reach, they're just going to groove a fastball right down the middle and see if he hits it out of the ballpark. So that's the comparison there. But I would think Ovechkin's going to break it this year. And he hasn't slowed down, especially since he's come back from the broken leg that he suffered back in November in Utah. And he has not missed a beat. He hasn't had big stretches or long stretches of games where he hasn't scored a goal. And I get it. This could turn on a dime where he could go goalless for the next 8 games and obviously put this record in jeopardy of breaking it this year. So I hope he does it. You know, I've been on top of this. And obviously there's a big thing for him to now get 3 goals right out of the gate. And let's see if he can continue him getting, whether it's continuing the streak or just getting these goals in bunches. You know that I will certainly have my finger on the pulse and make sure that he gets the attention that he deserves, because this is a record, like I said, that nobody in their right frame of mind would have thought it would have been even approached, let alone broken. And right now, Ovechkin is getting that much closer to breaking it. Now, as far as what's happening throughout the course of the weekend, there wasn't really much to get into. I know Edmonton had lost 2 games over the weekend. In Philadelphia on Saturday, losing 6-3, and then yesterday losing 7-3. So now they have this 5-game Eastern trip where they go to Florida, Tampa tomorrow, and then they go to Florida or to Sunrise to play the Panthers in the second part of their Stanley Cup final rematch. Remember, they played in Edmonton about a month and a half ago. And where's the game going to be played on? What network? Is it on TNT, ESPN? Right now, it's on no network. And this is one of the reasons why, going back to maybe having some momentum after the Four Nations face-off for the casual sports fan, or maybe even the good sports fan, to latch on to the NHL. Well, if they had this game on either one of those networks, at least they could say, or the networks could plug that come Thursday, 7 o'clock, another Stanley Cup final rematch. And I can't even remember. I think Florida actually won that first game in Edmonton. So maybe Edmonton can return the favor. And they know the sting of them losing that Game 7 after being behind 3-0 to come all the way back and then lose a Game 7 2-1 in that building. I get it. A regular season game isn't going to come close to a Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final, especially one that would have been historic if the Oilers won. But at least you could have a buildup. At least you could have something that the fan could say, oh yeah, maybe I will watch that, as opposed to whatever doubleheader is going to be on TNT there for the NBA. But that's the NHL. They could talk about the ratings. They could talk about how great they've gone. And I listened to a recent interview with Gary Bettman, and everything is coconuts, palm trees, sunshine, roses, etc. And of course, he's not going to kill the league. He's not going to bash it. And by any means, even if there's something that has gone wrong or something that needs to be improved, he's going to look at the glass half full. He's not going to destroy it. He's not going to say, well, you know what? It's out of my hands. What am I going to do? No, but it would have been nice to see Edmonton at Florida, first time since that Game 7 in that building, to possibly watch this rematch, as opposed to getting the NHL Center Ice package for the 40 of you that have it, so you could go ahead and watch the game. So let me get off of that, but Edmonton has that trip, and then they go to Carolina after that to close out their trip. And then, like I mentioned, they come back to New York in the middle of March for the 3 games regarding the tri-state teams that play here: Islanders, Rangers, Devils. But as far as anything else that's going on, I know the Bruins, they've suffered some big-time injuries. Charlie McAvoy, during the Four Nations face-off, had that shoulder issue where not only just in the AC joint, but it seems like he has like a nerve issue in that shoulder. And he's going to be out for some time. They do say week to week, but again, week to week. Does that mean 2 weeks, 3 weeks? And I get it. They're gauging it from week to week. But this seems to be a long-term issue for the defenseman. And obviously he's a key focal point to that back line, as well as Hampus Lindstrom, who still hasn't recovered from that knee injury that he suffered when he blocked a shot back in November, where he got surgery, but now there's been some complications in the rehab, and now they're going to have to go, I don't know if it's under the knife or arthroscopic, to where they're going to have to go back and see what they could do to get this knee back to 100%. Does that mean he's going to be done for the year? Chances are that may be the case. If the Bruins do qualify and make the postseason, maybe he'll be a part on the roster there at that time. But right now, it's not looking good, considering that he's been out 3.5 months. So for the Bruins, who have been scuffling all year, firing of Jim Montgomery, bringing in Joe Sacco, they've had their glimpses and moments, but certainly a far cry from what they've done over the last 2 years in the regular season. And here they are, just trying to stay afloat in the Eastern Conference playoff race. And I guess that's where I'll go to now as we take a look at the standings. Now you have Toronto overtaking the Panthers just by the slimmest of margins. 1 point there in the Atlantic. And then you have the Lightning, who are 3 points behind the Panthers. And that could make for a very interesting first-round matchup. And, of course, we've seen this movie before between Tampa and Florida with a bunch of playoff series just in the last 5 years, where Tampa has gotten the best of them, although last year Florida was able to finally get that piano off their back by beating them in a 5-game series. But for those 3 teams leading the Atlantic, of course, they could flip-flop at any moment. And, of course, the Lightning have played pretty well here, considering that the Lightning, after their early success in the 2020s, and then losing that cup final to Colorado after losing to Toronto and Florida in the first round. And now let's see if they could build some momentum to see if they could get maybe close to first place. They're only 4 points behind the Leafs. And who knows, with their pedigree and what they've done here in the early part of the decade, maybe that could go a long way. And who knows if they're going to get reinforcements, as I mentioned earlier. So keep the Lightning in mind, as they're certainly, no pun intended, within striking distance of first place there in the division. We talked about the Capitals. They're going to win the Metropolitan in their sleep. They're 14 points ahead of both Carolina and the Devils in the division. And then for the wild cards, now we can start to introduce them and how the wild card plays into this whole scenario. You have the Red Wings and Senators, 1 and 2 for the wild card, separated by just 2 points, 64-62. And then you have a scenario where it's a bit of a logjam. You have the Blue Jackets also with 62 points, but remember, although they are all tied as far as games played, but they have 2 less wins than the Senators. And of course, with the wins being the big wild card or the big tiebreaker there in the wild card, they currently have that number 2 seed. Then you have the Bruins at 61, just a point behind both Columbus and Ottawa. Then you have the Rangers at 60. So right there, you have those 3 teams are on the outside looking in, certainly within 2 points of Ottawa. And then after that, there's a little bit of a get back where you have the Islanders, Montreal, and Philadelphia at 57 points. All right, 5 points behind, not that far back. And then if you want to even throw the Penguins in the mix, where the Penguins are 2 points behind those 3 teams at 57, but 7 points behind the last spot there in the wild card. I guess you have to throw them in, despite the fact that they're 4 games under 500 at this present moment. But all right, we'll give them their respect, despite the fact that they are a far cry from their championship runs of the mid-20 teens. And we'll see what the Penguins are going to do here, if they're going to, by any stretch, maybe make some moves here to get them back in the playoff race. And then out west, you have the Winnipeg Jets, who have the most points in the sport with 83, 40 wins. They've won 9 in a row here and continue just to play well. And as I mentioned on Thursday's podcast, same for the Capitals, but now the Jets, they're going to have a bullseye on them to perform well here in this postseason. Now, I understand ebbs and flows of the year. I would think that they'll probably end up being a 1 seed, considering that the Vegas Golden Knights are at 74 points, 2 ahead of Edmonton, who have hit the skids here a little bit, as I talked about there, with the 2 losses in Washington and in Philadelphia. But we would think that the Jets are going to soar high and get themselves maybe a President's Trophy win, which I'm sure they probably don't want, knowing that the stigma of winning the regular season President's point total for most points in the sport over 82 games doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best team or get to or win a Stanley Cup, as we've seen here over the last couple of years, and pretty much historically for that matter. But for Winnipeg, they're certainly going to be in cruise control, although they are 7 points ahead of the Stars, who have played well, and they actually beat the Devils and Islanders here locally over the last couple of days. And then you have the Minnesota Wild, who are just 4 points behind the Dallas Stars there in the Central. Out in the Pacific, I mentioned Vegas and Edmonton separated by 2 points, 74-72. The Kings are 5 points behind Edmonton and 7 behind the Golden Knights. And as far as the wild card goes, you have Colorado and Vancouver. Now, Colorado is in good stead. They are 5 points ahead of the Canucks, 68-63. So not to say that Colorado wants to have a fallback as far as being the wild card, because when you look at that race, they are 4 points behind the Wild for that 3rd spot. And if they do get that 3rd spot, that means that they will have a first-round series against Dallas, as opposed to being a team that will play the Vegas Golden Knights as of today. And then you have Vancouver, like I mentioned, at 63 points. Outside looking in, you have Calgary at 62. Then you have the Utah Hockey Club at 59, St. Louis 58, Anaheim at 57, and then there's a significant drop-off after that. I get it that the Kraken are only 3 points behind the Ducks, but they are 9 points behind the Canucks there, so they have a lot of work to get to if they want to even be a part of the wild card mix. But I would think as of right now, unless Utah, St. Louis, and Anaheim, if they have runs in them to get themselves closer, and not that they're that far behind, but although they're on the fringe, but they are a 3-4 game losing streak from being completely out of it. And I understand you have less than, or just about 2/3 of a season to go, but still, these games, they go off the schedule like that. And obviously, if Colorado is going to start to click on all cylinders, and Vancouver, who obviously they were a very good team last year, and although they have some injuries that they've been battling with, in particular, Elias Pettersson was one. I know, and I'll even double check that, where he's a guy that has been in and out of the lineup, so you have to wonder whether or not that he's going to be a guy that could be relied on here over the course of this final stretch of the year. But when we have a scenario where the wild card in the West is a lot different than the East, where it's a little bit more competitive there, and out West, it's a little bit spread out. But as we all know, the NHL, you could get a 4 or 5 game winning streak and get yourselves back, whether it's in the playoff mix or even in contention for division or even for some better seeding. You can say the same for the NBA, which I'll get to in a second, but that's what we got there with the NHL to kick us off here as we get into the week. And as far as the schedule goes for the early part of the week, tonight, Vegas at LA, so let's see if the Kings could get closer to the Golden Knights there in the standings. Toronto at Boston tomorrow. Pittsburgh, Philly, the in-state rivals. Calgary at Washington. I only bring them up because of Ovechkin. Edmonton at Tampa, as we discussed. Dallas at Columbus. You have Rangers Islanders, for those who care. That's a rivalry of the past. That rivalry has been a far cry from what it once was. And that's pretty much there for Detroit at Minnesota tomorrow. Good game. And then Wednesday, New Jersey at Colorado, Vancouver at LA, and Winnipeg, Ottawa. That rounds out your schedule before we get into Thursday, and obviously we'll reconvene at that time. Now as I take off the skates and put on the high tops to go over what's happening in the association, and quite a bit has happened here over the last few days. And although I talked about them a couple weeks back, but I have to bring them up again, and this is going to be a concern for the Knicks fan, because if you weren't concerned after them losing to the Lakers there, what was it, a little over 3 weeks ago, and even when the Celtics came in a week later that Saturday night, which was 2 weeks from this past Saturday, now you have to be a little bit alarmed, considering that, okay, you had the All-Star break, you had 2 guys playing the All-Star game, Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns. Not that that's a big deal, because it's not as if they're playing 40 minutes in the game, but now you come out of the break and you have 2 ginormous games against teams that you're looking up to in the standings. That being the Cavaliers Friday night and the Celtics Sunday afternoon. Now, Friday night was just a no contest. They didn't even belong on the same floor as the Cavaliers, as they blew them up by 34, 36 points, whatever the final was. What was it, 143, 106? Some crazy numbers like that. And, okay, not good. Certainly one that you have to lick your wounds, and with a quick turnaround that you have to come to Boston, a team that's also beaten you by 23 and 27 points, I believe, respectively. No, I may even take that back. No, I think it's 23 and 27. And for them to go into Boston and not be competitive for the first 2+ quarters. Now, granted, they had a furious comeback to where into the fourth quarter they cut it to 6 at 95-89, but then the Celtics went on a 10-0 run and pretty much put the game on ice, as they ended up winning 118 to 105. And if it's a scenario where you're a Knicks fan, you could say, all right, we know that the Cavaliers and Celtics are better than us, and all we got to do is just kind of shake it off and get back on the beam to see whether or not we, as we get deeper into the season, will belong with those guys and make sure that when the chips fall, what does it sound like it's thundering upstairs? I don't know what's happening there for those who are listening, if it's coming through your microphone. And somebody's drilling, so my apologies there, as something's going on with construction. But for the Celtics and what they did to the Knicks there yesterday, all I'm going to say is this. The Knicks fan has to be, I don't even want to go as far as saying alarmed, but heavily concerned because you've had the two teams in your division ahead of you just beat the brakes off of you. And you haven't beaten Cleveland this year, you're 0-2 against them. You haven't beaten the Celtics this year, you're 0-3 against them. You want to say, all right, they were 0-2 against the Thunder, they were 0-1 against the Lakers. All right, they beat the Nuggets 2 games, and that's something, all right, you hang your hat on, but you can hang your hat on those 2, but what about the other 6 that I just brought up? And we get it that they have a lot of talent on this team, and I don't know what's missing. You have a very good coach, a defensive-minded coach. You couldn't tell by what you saw there over the weekend, but maybe, and they can't get anybody right now unless somebody's on the waiver wire or gets a buyout or anything like that, because we all know the trade deadline is come and gone. But if you're a Knicks fan, you need to have somebody that's going to really be a presence, somebody that has maybe even won a championship. Because for the Miles Bridges and the Jalen Brunsons and even the Karl Anthony Towns and OG Anunobis and guys like that, what have they won in the grand scheme of things? They need a guy that's going to be almost a glue guy, and they do have glue guys on the team, but knows and tells this team how to win. Whether it's a PJ Tucker type, and not to say PJ Tucker is going to move the needle, but he did win a championship in Milwaukee in 2021, and he does spot up with his corner threes, but he plays hard-nosed defense, and is a guy that is going to show and wear his heart on his sleeve, and maybe that's what the Knicks need, a little bit more attitude that they have not shown here, especially against the big teams in the sport. So if you're a Knicks fan, this is the team. This is what you're going to have to do. Now, I understand come playoff time, you could get hot, you could get on a roll, and who knows, maybe you could push the Celtics to a 7th game. Highly unlikely the way they played against the Celtics this year, but stranger things have happened, who knows. But if I'm a Knicks fan, I would be really concerned, because if you're 26-6 against the teams that are below 500 and just 11-14 against teams that are over 500, I'm sorry. If it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, guess what? It is not a squirrel. So I'll just leave it at that. And then when you have what's going on there, not only in San Antonio and Philadelphia. Now San Antonio, the news came down there on Thursday where Victor Wembanyama, he's going to be done for the year because of a blood clot. Can I enunciate here, JAYREELZ? Because of a blood clot that he has in his shoulder that was detected there coming out of the break. And for him, and that's just an enormous loss, because as you heard the podcast, if you're new to it and haven't heard my podcast over the last few weeks, I've talked about how Victor Wembanyama, I want to see the Spurs in the postseason just to see what that's like, even if it's just a 1-game playoff, considering that there would have been a play-in team. I want to see Wembanyama on the big stage. I want to see how he's going to perform, even though it's not the breadth of a Western Conference 1-8 playoff series. And knowing that he's going to be out because of the blood clot and because of him, with precaution and understandably so, not going to play the rest of the year, that is just a huge blow for the league and obviously for the Spurs. And then on top of that, I don't know if this is going to be a tie-in, but considering that the Spurs, I don't want to say they're throwing up the white flag, but in all likelihood, it looks like Gregg Popovich, who has been out since, I believe, November when he suffered that mild stroke and he is recovering, that we're not going to see him on the sidelines there or patrolling the bench for the Spurs for the remainder of the year, which is understandable too. He's a guy that's in his 70s. No need to rush back. Maybe if they were going to be in the mix here for a spot in the postseason, that it will come back on those final couple of weeks. And who knows, if he's healthy enough, maybe he will do that just to kind of get some momentum and build into the spring and summer for next year when hopefully his team is fully healthy. But for right now, you're not going to see Popovich and certainly not Wembanyama over the rest of this regular season. And then on top of that, you have a scenario with the Sixers, who have been going through it all year, as I mentioned, time in and time out, and now they're going to have to explore some other possibilities or options for one Joel Embiid. And the crazy thing about this is that for all of the misfortune and all of just the expectations that really have been out the window pretty much since the start of training camp, and even with their big three, with Paul George, who's also nursed his own injuries, and Tyrese Maxey, and even though when all three have been in the lineup together, they're 7-8, so it's not as if in the 15 games they're 11-4 or 10-3 or have had this significant bump when all three of those players are in the lineup together. But for now Embiid, with this knee, and for Nick Nurse to say that he's not moving as well as they thought, considering with all of the maladies that he's had, the surgeries, whether it's with the knee or even with his foot for that matter. And now they're going to have to explore whether or not they're going to have to delve into surgery, because if they do get surgery now, the likelihood of him coming back is going to be slim and none. And even if it's a scenario where it's a 6-week injury, and let's say he comes back in early April, and here's the crazy thing about it. They are still a fringe playoff team in the East. Now, that's more of an indictment on how terrible the East is, because when we pull up the schedule, or pull up the standings, right now it's constituted. The 10th seed in the Eastern Conference belongs to the Chicago Bulls, and they're 22-35. Now, the Brooklyn Nets are just a half game behind them, and give it up, the Nets have played well, and granted, they're 14 games under 500, so how much could you really be excited or really give credit to the Nets, considering that they have brought in a new coach, Jordi Fernandez, and they pretty much piecemeal their team together, knowing that they traded Mikal Bridges, got the wrong Bridges. Mikal Bridges on the other side of the bridge to the Knicks with all the draft picks coming their way, the buyout for Ben Simmons, and pretty much this is a team that has a bunch of ragamuffins that, unfortunately for them, with the new coach and with a remodel of this organization with the Nick Claxtons of the world and the Cameron Johnsons and guys that, of course, you couldn't pick out a lineup, even D'Angelo Russell with his second go-around here as a member of the Nets. But with them, just a smidge behind the Bulls, guess who's right behind them for a spot if they want to get to the play-in tournament? That's right, the Sixers. They are literally one game behind a game and a loss behind the Bulls. Now they're 2 back, or a game and a half back, but just one in the loss of them getting a 10 seed. And I get it. People could say, well, if Embiid is healthy by the end of the year, and if they're still hovering around that 10 seed, and if George is healthy and Maxi's healthy, can they have a run in them? I guess, but how far that run is going to go, considering that Embiid, his body is breaking down right in front of our eyes. His body has betrayed him here over the last couple of years, ever since he won the MVP 2 years ago. And really, can you trust Embiid to be upright, whether it's for a final stretch of a season, if they're trying to get into the playoffs? And let's say they do that, can he survive a 7-game series? He barely made it through that Knicks series last year, and that was the first round. So although things may be bleak, and although things may be just an out-and-out disaster, in Philadelphia, they are still have a pulse. They still have a heartbeat. And as crazy as it is to say, and again, this is more of an indictment on the East than it is on the Sixers, because if they had this record out West, they would be far gone. In fact, looking at it right now, they'd be 7 games behind the Sacramento Kings for the final spot. And the Kings are at 500, 28-28, whereas we know the Bulls are 22-35. That's all you need to know about the East, and how Philly is still hovering and still within possibility of making it into the play-in tournament. Now, I don't know. Would this mean that if they do opt for surgery, is this it for Embiid for the rest of the year, so he can come back as strong, as focused, as determined as ever come next year? And maybe can you sneak into the back door of a postseason with just Paul George and Tyrese Maxey? I guess you could, because the East is so weak. Those 2 players are better than anything the Brooklyn Nets have, and same for the Chicago Bulls. So lots of games to be played out here, and just a crazy scenario when you think about it there in Philadelphia. But besides that, you also have Anthony Davis. He's progressing. Still out a couple more weeks with that adductor strain, and as we all know, that is a key component for the Mavericks' success here, especially in light of the controversial trade with Luka. So we'll see what's going to happen there with AD, and hopefully he comes back 100% healthy and stays in the lineup, especially for the Maverick faithful down there in Big D. And then you also have Bobby Portis, who got suspended 25 games for testing positive for a banned substance to treat pain and inflammation. He thought he was taking one particular substance, but it happened to be another, and it's just a matter of a few consonants. I believe it was supposed to be Toradol, but he took Tramadol, and I guess Tramadol is on that banned substance list, and for whatever reason, he didn't read it properly, or when he got it, he's like, all right. And I get it, it's an honest mistake. People could say, you should have known better, you should have read it, you should have this, should have that. All right, well, if you think one is a legal substance, and it's just off by a couple of letters, and he didn't do a double take, I'm sure he's saw it and said, all right, put it in his bag, and then applied it later on, and then boom, got suspended. Now he's going to be pretty much done for the rest of the regular season, so he would come back for the postseason. So who knows? Maybe his legs will be fresher, and the Bucks, who have played well here in the recent stretch. So for Portis, he's going to be out, and let's see how that's going to unfold there, especially for the Bucks, who are trying to get themselves in good stead in the Eastern Conference. Now, as far as the division, I won't go to the divisions, I'll go to the whole conference. We know the Cavaliers have played well, 7 in a row that they've won right now. Not looking to let go of that conference lead and to have the East go through them, which obviously for them is going to be huge. Not to say that the Celtics can't go in there and win a Game 7 in a conference final, but you'd rather have that game in your building than not. And we talk about the Celtics. They've won 5 in a row here. And the Celtics, they played well against these big teams. Now, I know they lost to the Lakers there after beating the Clippers the night before on that West Coast trip. But the Celtics, they beat Cleveland not too long ago in Cleveland, as we know. Them beating the Knicks here yesterday, and they played well. Winners of 5 in a row, and they're going to be tough. Because I know once everybody's healthy and everybody's on the same page, and despite the fact that I've even talked about how they have a flick-the-switch mentality, and they've coasted through some of these games, losing to the Hawks and losing focus in some of the games that you figure, hey, what's going on here? But give it up. It is a long season, and I'm sure they just want to press the fast-forward button to get to the middle of April and start their postseason run and their defense of the title that they won last year. But Celtics are playing very well here. And even though 6 back in the loss, but they have not been able to inch that much closer considering that the Cavs have been on a roll. Then you have the Knicks, followed by the Pacers, Bucks. Now the Bucks are just a half game behind, but 1 in the loss behind Indiana to get that 4-5, which would be important. And I'm sure Milwaukee would want to get some payback to Indiana, because remember, in that first round last year, although without Giannis and with Lillard in and out of the lineup, they were able to beat them in 6 games, and I'm sure they're going to want to get back at them. Granted that they still have the remainder of the regular season to play out, but that would be a very intriguing first round considering of what took place there last year. And then the Pistons, who have won 6 in a row, break up the Pistons as they have just played very well and now have a 4-game in the loss, but a 3-game lead over the 7th place Orlando Magic. So not to say that the Detroit can put their feet up, but they do have some leeway and have a cushion there to be in the body of the Eastern Conference playoff. Then you have Miami after Orlando, followed by the Hawks and the Bulls. Those teams are separated by Orlando, Miami, and Atlanta, that is. They're separated by just 2 games. And let's see where they position, because 7 and 8 is important in both conferences, because let's just say, for instance, if Miami plays Orlando, and even the loser of that game, remember, they had the fallback to play the 9-10 game. Not that you want to go that route, but still, it's better to be 7-8. So if you're the Hawks, who are currently 2 in the loss, but a game behind Miami, you want to try to see if you can get into that 8 seed. So at least you have that safety net of losing that game, and you still have another game to play. Where if you're in the 9-10 game, you lose it, you're gone. So that's the Eastern Conference. We talked about Brooklyn, Philly, and that scenario there with the bottom rung of the East. Out West, we know that the Thunder, similar to the Cavaliers, they have a big cushion there as the front runner in the conference. 10 games, 9.5 over both Denver and the Grizzlies. Grizzlies currently have the 2nd seed as of right now, I guess due to tiebreaker. And with the Lakers beating the Nuggets there on Saturday night, that showcase snapping their 9-game winning streak. Now with Luka, he had a big game that night, 32, 10, and 7. Now Luka, who has had a handful of games here with the Lakers, is this now his time to take off? And even though we got to see whether or not he's going to remain healthy, and if that calf is not going to keep barking and it's going to crop up on him, but now you have to wonder whether or not Luka, with the break gone and the dust has settled from this trade, that now let's see if he could be himself. Now, again, he's going to have to share with LeBron, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to defer, considering that LeBron, it's his team, despite the fact 40 years of age, bionic that he is. But I would think with those 2 basketball minds and IQs that they will work off one another as best as they possibly can. And Luka should have some big-time success here throughout the rest of this regular season and into the playoffs, so we would think. But with Luka's performance there on Saturday night, maybe that's a springboard for him to kind of get his confidence, to kind of get it to a point where he knows he can play with LeBron and when he can take over when he has to. So let's see how that's going to, again, unfold here throughout the rest of these final, 25, 26 games. Then, like I mentioned, you have the Lakers there. Then you have the Rockets, who have slipped here a little bit, followed by the Clippers in the top 6 there of the Western Conference. And to break it down, Memphis, Denver, as I mentioned, 9.5 behind the Thunder. But then you have the Rockets and Lakers 2 games back. Lakers 1 game behind the Nuggets and Grizzlies, for second and third place, but 2 back as far as the games behind in the column. But then you have the Rockets, who are also in that same suit, 2 games behind. The Clippers are 3.5 behind both the Lakers and Rockets, so it looks like they may be nestled in there with Minnesota, with Dallas, who are currently 7th and 8th in the Western Conference, both tied at 31 and 27. The Clippers are 31 and 25, so they have 2 games in hand on both the T-Wolves and Mavs. So keep in mind for that. Then you have Golden State, who have played well here, winners of 3 in a row, and trying to get some separation to get out of that 10 seed or below, out of the playoff picture, as they have been as early as a couple weeks back. But at 30 and 27, they are tied with the T-Wolves and Mavs for losses there and have a game in hand, but with Minnesota and Dallas. So that is going to be a fight with those 4 teams to see who stays out of the play-in and who will be a part of the play-in. And then you have the Kings, as I mentioned, 28 and 28. Although a game behind, but a game and a half behind the Warriors, but a game and a loss behind Golden State. And then you have Phoenix, who are a game and a half behind the Kings, 2 in a loss. And then San Antonio, I guess we could not even mention them unless they get on a roll. So it looks like it's going to be the Suns trying to sneak in there or trying to do their best to knock on that door when it comes to the playoffs. And then as far as the schedule here for the early part of the week in the association, tonight, Clippers in Detroit, Denver at Indiana, Minnesota, OKC. Tomorrow, Cleveland at Orlando, Boston's in Toronto, Milwaukee at Houston, Phoenix at Memphis, Dallas at LA to play the Lakers. That is your TNT. Cleveland, Orlando, Dallas, and the Lakers there on tomorrow night on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, Knicks and Sixers. Games of note, people. OKC coming to town. They're playing Brooklyn. So for those who want to see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in all of his glory, they come to town there on Wednesday. Then you have Atlanta, Miami. Well, I don't want to say it's a big game, but Atlanta plays Miami because of the seeding that we discussed. So that's a game we'll have to keep in mind. San Antonio, Houston. That game doesn't have a lot. Obviously, with Wemby out, that is an ESPN doubleheader game to go along with Knicks and Sixers. That is pretty much it as we head into Thursday and beyond. And we'll talk more about Thursday's schedule at that time on the podcast when we get there Thursday. All right, now let me turn my attention to college basketball. I'll stay with the high tops, of course. And what we have here is pretty much status quo. Now, the SEC, as I've talked about, very competitive conference, as we know. Now, they've beaten each other up a little bit, although Auburn continues to be at the top. They beat Georgia there on Saturday, as well as Alabama beating on Kentucky. So, of course, with the in-conference play, there's going to be a lot of that back and forth, teams beating other teams. But you do have a scenario where you had Texas A&M beat Tennessee. So that is one where Tennessee is going to move up, or you would think maybe a notch or two, and Texas A&M is going to fall back. Then you also had Missouri and Arkansas, where Arkansas beat Mizzou. And this is after Mizzou beat Alabama earlier in the week. So, like I mentioned, SEC is going to pound on one another here over these last couple of weeks leading into the conference tournament. And then you had Mississippi State lose to Oklahoma. So that's another scenario where the SEC is getting, I don't want to say pounded, it's a little bit too strong, but they're getting nicked up here. And we would expect that as you get deeper into the month, and we just have 5 more days left. If I look on the 4 more days, when you think about it, of February before we hit the month of March and the madness that will ensue, more so in the middle of the month. But other than that, you don't really have a lot cooking and shaking there with college basketball. I know St. John's beat UConn there yesterday at the Garden. And although St. John's is more defensive oriented and a rebounding team, but they did put up some big numbers there yesterday against the two-time defending champs there in the Huskies. So for St. John's to put up almost 90 points on the Huskies does say a lot for what the Johnnies are capable of doing, but we know that they're more of a breakneck, full-court press, typical Patino team that we've seen here over the years, dating back to his days in Providence in the late 80s, and as well Kentucky, Louisville, Iona, for those who had seen him here locally. But that is all you really have there with the sport. And as far as games this week, I know Monday night you always have some interesting games. Tonight, right now I'm not seeing anything. What, Michigan and Nebraska, is that going to tickle your fancy? Houston at Texas Tech, that's a big-time game there. Right now, 5-seed Houston versus a 9-seed Texas Tech. And I know the rankings will come out later on. But college basketball, as we get into March and obviously uncover a lot more of it, you know that the madness will certainly not only be on the court, but certainly in front of this microphone as I detail what's happening with the collegiate circuit. All right, now let me get into the batter's box, talk a little baseball, and I'll cap it off with some NFL before I bid adieu, and also some podcasting news and notes that I have to get to. As far as the baseball, with the spring training schedule opening up on Saturday, and the big news there, especially if you're a Met fan, was Juan Soto in his first at-bat hit a home run opposite field there against the Astros. And to me, much ado about nothing. I get it, it's a good optic. I get it, makes you feel good. I get it, makes you look at what Soto's going to bring and how the expectations just get ratcheted up by each at-bat. But that's going to be it for 162 games starting in late March. Right now, it does not mean a damn thing. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put cold water on Soto, on the accomplishment, etc., but it means nothing. Soto can hit 20 home runs here between now and March 27th, but is it going to matter once we get the numbers and the games that count? That's all I care about, because if he hits 20 home runs in the months of March and April, then I'll jump up and down and go crazy. But right now, I cannot. So I have to pump the brakes on that. And then the Yankees have been in the news here quite a bit, more so off the field than on the field. I'll start off with Aaron Boone getting his extension through 2027. He was a lame duck coming into this year, and because he got the extra 2 years, that means he's scot-free off of that. So the Yankee fan, I don't know how they feel about that. If you want, leave some notes in the comments for those who are watching. And if you made it this far, I appreciate it. You know that. But I would think to the good Yankee fan, the big-time Yankee fan, they're like, well, I knew he was coming back. He just got his team to the World Series, a World Series that the team has not seen since 2009, But for Boone, he's your guy. And we've seen him in big spots, especially Game 1 in the World Series last year, not maneuvering his bullpen the way he should. And let's see if that's going to be a situation, not necessarily throughout the 162-game marathon, but more so the sprint that is the postseason in Major League Baseball. So we won't have to worry about that until we get to that point, but he is your guy for this year and the next 2 years after that. Then hell froze over. The ban of facial hair, in particular beards, have gone by the wayside. But there is another caveat to this, and I'll get to that in a second. So in a press conference, Hal Steinbrenner had said it was time, if the players who had beards gives them a sense of their being, taking ownership to that, their look, pride, etc., as long as it's groomed, he's all right with that. So you're not going to get a scenario of the 2003-2004 Red Sox idiot team, whether your name is Johnny Damon or Trot Nixon, not that he wore a long beard, but, had the scruff, Big Papi, David Ortiz, I was going to say Manny Ramirez, and that's the thing, with the long locks that he had coming from his hair, I don't think that's banned. So if you want to grow your hair out of length, I don't know if that means if you just want to let it grow long, or if you want to get locks, or if you want to do whatever other hairstyle that would deem fit or would float your boat if you're a Yankee player. But right now, I think it's just the facial hair. So you can have the mustache, as you've seen over the years, Nestor Cortez when he was part of the team. But as far as growing beards, you're going to see players do that. So if that meant Devin Williams, oh man, I shaved my beard. I didn't have to, knowing that they've implemented this particular rule to the team. But I'm sure he's probably starting to grow it as we speak. So kudos to him. And it's about time. Now, I can't applaud Hal Steinbrenner, although maybe his dad is turning over in his grave. But it has been 15 years since he's passed. And it is 2025. A lot more men wear beards than they have so many moons ago. So good for him, good for the team. No sweat off my back. But the length of hair, that's the big one. Because if somebody's going to come in with long hair or it's past the collar as George once constituted, that was a no-no. Is that the same here in Yankee land? I guess we'll have to see if somebody's willing and bold to try to let their hair grow past the collar. So we have that. And then finally, ESPN and Major League Baseball have decided to mutually part ways after this year because they had a contract that ran through 2028 for ESPN to broadcast games. But as you all know, that bloom has been well off of the rose. That star has certainly fallen over the years because if you recall, Baseball Tonight from 7 to 8 on a Sunday, that was one I look forward to if and when I was around. Because obviously in the middle of the summer, you're running around, beaches and parties, etc. I mean, those days are long gone, minus the beaches, in my eyes. But when you have a situation where, and word on the street was that Major League Baseball said, this is it. So even though it was a quote-unquote mutually parting of the ways, but it seemed like Major League Baseball was the one that took the reins and said, we'll back out of this, no problem. If you want to put it on us, fine. But again, they respectfully went their separate ways. But now, where does Major League Baseball go? Are you going to be full-time on TBS, which means games on TNT? Doesn't mean you're going to be MLB Network, which we know they pick up games here along the way, but still, is there going to be another outlet? We know streaming is going to play a big presence here, as we've seen, Apple TV, Amazon, especially with the Yankees, the Roku TV with the games on Sunday. But who's going to be at the forefront here? Which network? Now, it's not going to be a regular network. I mean, really, is Fox going to now put out games every week, whether it's a Friday night or a Wednesday night on Fox? Is that going to work here throughout the landscape here in Major League Baseball? I don't know. Obviously, that is well above my pay grade, but they leave themselves open, Major League Baseball that is, for a struggle down the road where they are going to need somebody to broadcast their games in a regular season, or like we knew, ESPN, they also had the wild card round. So after this year, if it's a situation where TBS, TNT, Animal Planet, are they also going to run wild card games? So all this right now is just conjecture, it's just speculation, but you would, hope that a deal gets done and not at the 11th hour or not on August 31st when we know that the season is about to close and you still have next year to get themselves acclimated, etc. But to me, I find that fascinating to see what's going to happen there, knowing that Major League Baseball is not going to be shown on the worldwide leader of sports, which is a shame because they've been a part of baseball, I think, dating back to 1988. And now that it's pretty much at a wrap and it's going to come to a conclusion, and with the NFL, we know that they are bulletproof, and with the hockey getting TNT and also ESPN back in their good graces, and the NBA, although kind of scatterbrained and not really zeroed in and tuned in on the season for those who are not really following the sport, but for baseball to now, like I mentioned, take the reins to say, this is it. We're washing our hands. We'll go elsewhere. Well, good luck to you guys and gals because it's certainly not going to be easy. Yes, you may get a network to latch onto. You may get a little bit more notoriety, but that doesn't necessarily translate to any success there unless these games are just going to be off the wall, extra innings, walk-offs, things of that nature to where you're going to have your head explode on how this team was down 7-2 in the ninth inning and they came back and won on the grand slam. So that's what you have with the baseball. And then lastly, I'll get into a couple of NFL news and notes. For starters, as I get the helmet and shoulder pads on, The longtime offensive lineman Zach Martin of the Dallas Cowboys, drafted in 2014, has had an all-pro career. Probably going to get the Hall of Fame, or get to the Hall of Fame, as he, I believe, has 7 first-team All-Pros. And if you have 7 All-Pros like that, you are a slam dunk, no doubt about it, him going to be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But who knows? It could be a scenario where he wasn't as dominant, or they'll find a reason why he shouldn't be a part of being a first-ballot Hall of Famer. I think he's going to make it regardless, but he retires after 10 years with the Cowboys. So thoughts and obviously well wishes to Zach Martin and his family as he looks to see what he's going to pursue after his days of being an NFL offensive guard. And then break up the Jaguars as they finally get a GM. We know about that whole Liam Cohen, the Buccaneer offensive coordinator, and then you had Trent Baalke, the former GM of the Jaguars, how they were back and forth on a contract, and how at the time, based on what I read, how the GM, Baalke, was fired, dismissed, because Cohen didn't accept the job, and then Cohen comes back without a GM in tow, but then now they got their guy there, and Liam Cohen, and they know one another from the days of the Rams, as the now new GM goes by the name of James Gladstone. He was a director of scouting over the last 3 years, so he knows his way around scouting, or a way around salary cap, structuring a team, etc. So congratulations, kudos to Gladstone to see what he could do there in Jacksonville, as they've been scuffling in their own right here over the last 8 years. Their last playoff appearance, although they did get to an AFC title game, but that was it. Oh wait, let me think. Maybe they played Buffalo after that? That was in 2017, off the top of my head, when Buffalo beat Jacksonville. That was a 2017 season, so I do have my years mixed up, but without question, the GM and coach now, side by side, you would think they're with Baalke and with Cohen. And then lastly, the Saints, who just recently hired Kellen Moore as the head coach. Now he hires Brandon Staley as his defensive coordinator, and talk about it coming full circle. Now, Kellen Moore, who was a member of the Cowboys, and then went to the Clippers for a year before he got let go, and then went to the Eagles for 2 years. And then Staley, who Moore worked under his staff last year before he got fired. Now Staley resurfaces in New Orleans to see whether or not he's going to work with the young gun on coaching. Is he an assistant coach? Is he a 1A coach? That we'll have to wait and see if we're watching these Saint games. And I do like the hire there by New Orleans. I think he's a guy that is certainly bright, a guy that knows defense, and I'm sure you're going to see everything taped up to the walls there in the locker room, and to a point where the success of the team is going to be based on, defensively, on Staley and what they're going to be able to accomplish here as the Saints try to get it back to marching, knowing that these last couple of years have been one to forget. And that is pretty much it, people. Let's see if anything else has popped up here over the last almost hour. Any breaking news, anything of note? No, I think I've just covered it. So now in closing, just some housekeeping news and notes. This Saturday, March 1st, the 7th anniversary podcast coming at you. I'm looking at a 7-hour window, 12 to 7. That may change because I'm looking to do this at a destination which is right now unknown. If worse comes to worse, I may do it from my humble abode here where I'm shooting this current video podcast, but it's coming this Saturday, which will actually fall on the anniversary, March 1st, 2018, when I launched the JAYREELZ podcast. So I'm going to have guests. I'm going to have a couple of giveaways. I'm going to have just a recap of these 7 years and where the podcast is going, a bunch of different angles. It's going to be interactive. So for those who join, type in the chat room. I'll be chatting back and forth. I'll put your questions up on the screen, etc., responses. It is going to be a good time for all as we approach another milestone here, just days away of being, count them, 7. Unbelievable to think that this journey continues, but this baby is about to be lucky number 7. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for you guys and gals, because whether you're my day ones or have been there since today, this being your first day, I appreciate you and I thank you for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, as well as the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, where I post daily shorts, among other types of content there. And again, it goes a long way of subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, because I'm trying to increase the visibility of this podcast, despite it being almost 7 years. But this is a little engine that could. I'm a one-man operation, independent podcaster doing this full time. Still trying to earn a buck here, people. So please help your brother out. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following: on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, as well as the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Twitter, just JAYREELZ1, that just a number. And the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. You know I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. Sports in the blood. I always look forward to producing and recording, posting these podcasts on a week in, week out basis. As long as I'm alive and breathing, I'm not going anywhere. This is what I love to do. This is what I was born to do, and this is what I was built to do. Please, for me to quit my job to pursue this full time, you know, at my tender age, where 5 weeks from today, I'm going to turn Lawrence Taylor, Hollywood Henderson, and plenty of other 56s out there. Lamar Woodley, when he was a Steeler, 56 people. So you know that pushing all my chips in the middle of the table to bet on myself, this is what I was born to do. So please, help out your boy, help out your favorite little sports podcast host, because it'll go a long way in trying to reach those who are familiar with yours truly and this podcast. So stay tuned for what's happening this week. You know I'm going to keep you abreast on everything that's going on, not only with the podcast, but also with the anniversary live stream on YouTube only at JAYREELZ. So please stay tuned to what's going on, because you know as long as I'm alive and breathing and in front of this microphone and this camera, I'm going to deliver nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the dice, diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.